Okay. Pain, temperature, and coarse touch. So that's that non-discriminative touch we talked about that's carried on this pathway. Itch and tickle is kind of what we're talking about there. This is called the anterolateral system. I would rather refer to all these pathways together as called the anterolateral system. And we call it the anterolateral system because it starts in the anterolateral part of the spinal cord. All of these pathways are starting out in the same place. So when we talk about this anterolateral system, we talk about these, we'll talk about, 5 pathways here. So 4 of the pathways, those are for the body. There's 1 for the face and head, but the 4 pathways for the body, they all start out coming into the spinal cord the same way. They all cross over initially, then they go up the anterolateral part of the spinal cord all as a group. It's just where they end up or stop or their final destination determines what pathway it is, okay? So they all just end in different places. They all start out together, start their way up the spinal cord together. Some just stop earlier. They dump off their information to a different region in the nervous system, and that's how you define each of these pathways. So the first part of these pathways is all pretty well identical between the 4 different pathways that we're going to talk about from the body. Then the head, the trigeminal, is a little different, okay? I like to refer to the spinothalamic tract as just the fast pain pathway that actually goes to the thalamus and goes to conscious awareness of fast pain. Because that's, if you say spinothalamic, that means it goes from the spinal cord up to the thalamus. And if it goes to the thalamus, it's going to go to the cortex. So that tells me that's the conscious fast pain pathway. The anterolateral system includes the spinothalamic tract plus spinal limbic, spinal reticular, the other pathways is how I consider it. All right, so this is not how you want to do your testing with your diabetic patients with peripheral neuropathy or with your fellow students. We're going to practice a little bit, review some sensory testing on Friday. Hopefully we have time for that. So here's the anterolateral system. So this includes these 4 pathways, okay, that come from the body. The most traditional one we consider or talk about the most is this one, the spinothalamic, which is the fast pain and temperature from the body, upper and lower body, going to the cortex. Okay. These 3 together here, these are slow pain. Okay, slow pain. Sometimes these are called divergent pain pathways because they all come in together and then they just diverge. They're going to different locations, okay? And the names pretty well tell you where they go. So that's what's nice about at least these anterolateral systems. So this is spinothalamic. It's going to go from the spinal cord to the thalamus, and if it goes to the thalamus, it's going to go to the cortex. So you know that pathway where it's going. This one is spinolimbic. So it's going to start in the spinal cord, like with all these other pathways. They all start with spino. But it's going to go up, and it's just going to terminate and stop in the limbic system. It's actually going to go into the limbic system as opposed to the thalamus into the cortex. It's going to go into a deeper part of your brain that's associated with more emotional relationship of pain, and it connects to your emotion, okay? The more emotional kind of gut response that you have to pain, especially with long-term pain. That's where they say pain really is in your head. I mean, you have pain signals going to parts of your brain that associate emotion with it. Negative, typically, emotion with pain because you don't want to have pain, and it's a negative experience for most of us. And that can be influenced, though, like things like nature and nurture and those kind of things. So as you're being raised, and depending on how your mother, father, whoever treated you and told you about pain when you were having a pain response and made it a negative experience, positive experience, or whatever, told you to suck it up, or they overly, were like, oh, it's not going to be okay, what's going to, and made every little pain experience this big deal, that there's some neuroplasticity and things going on there with these connections of some of these, like to the limbic system, okay? Then we have the spinomesencephalic. Mesencephalon, that's the brain them, and that's particularly the midbrain area. So this is where some of that pain is going to be stopped in the midbrain area, the spinomesencephalic. And then the spino-reticular. There's a thing, reticular formation. There is a group of cells and structures that are in the kind of heart or meat of the brainstem that run all the way up and down, all the way from the midbrain, pons, and medulla, called the reticular formation. It's in the tegmentum of the brainstem, which is just the meaty center of it, basically. And within there is the reticular formation. Within the reticular formation, there are areas that are associated with descending pain control, okay? And so we'll talk about pain control on Friday and how our different ways that different levels within our nervous system that we can try to control pain. The connections with the reticular formation will then, the reticular formation will take those slow aching pain signals, process them, and send signals even down to the spinal cord to then start to try to inhibit that pain. Okay, it's our natural pain response, opiates, enkephalins, endorphins that we release down on at the origin in the spinal cord where that pain is coming in to try to moderate that slow pain, okay? So that's how you break those down. Yeah?
Where does the trigeminal fit into that?
I will show you guys. Yeah, we'll show you. So there is a trigeminal, yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. So let's talk about spinothalamic first, the most common one. Pain receptors, pain and temperature are all free nerve endings. Okay, so all these just start out with free nerve endings. Okay, so that's easy to remember. So always it's going to be free nerve endings. For this, the modality of sensation it's carrying is fast localized pain. Hurts right here and right now. Okay. So here's the foot. Let's follow the foot. It's coming in. Our cell body, just like all of our sensory first order neurons, are coming in. The cell body's in the dorsal root ganglion. Fast pain, the axon type is the A delta. Okay, so A delta is the type of peripheral nerve fiber. It's, medium myelinated. It's not totally unmyelinated like C fibers. The C fibers are the slowest, but A deltas are kind of like medium myelinated. Not super big, but not super tiny. But they carry fast pain. Enters the lateral division of the dorsal root. So when it comes in this dorsal root, you remember all your proprioceptive stuff, your spinocerebellar and your dorsal column, medial lemniscus, they came in the medial division of the dorsal root. These guys come in the lateral division of the dorsal root. Okay. Then they actually enter into a little pathway, because it doesn't show it in this picture, but it does show it in another picture in your book. There's a little bit of a pathway right back here, this little white matter area right before the dorsal horn. This is called the dorsolateral tract of Lissauer. And it's kind of in this region right here in the spinal cord. So there's actually a little tract that runs up and down. And what happens is your pain signals, when they first come in, these axons come in, they don't always make an immediate connection at the exact level they came in. This is showing it making an immediate connection. But actually what can happen is your axon may come in and it'll go up or down a level or two before it makes its first synapse. It's not clinically that relevant, but it can be, because when we talk about spinal cord injury, sometimes the way somebody can present, again, with some dermatonal overlap, because of the fact that these tracts kind of go up and down a few levels, you may notice that somebody who has a spinal cord injury to a certain level, like a T4, they may still have some pain sensation even down into T5 because of some overlap of the dermatones, because of this movement of some of the pain signals up or down a level as it comes in. And it might avoid the injury a little bit and allow you to still feel some pain sensation a level or two below where the actual spinal cord injury is. So that's all I want to point out there. Okay. Once it does make its synapse, so let me just erase some of this stuff. Once it synapses right here, it synapses after it into that dorsal horn, right? So it maybe goes up or down a segment or two, but then it comes into that dorsal horn and makes its first synapse. So the cell body for the second order neuron is in an area of the dorsal horn called the substantia gelatinosa. That also happens to be primarily within what's called lamina 2, with some of lamina 1 and 5. Remember those lamina we showed you? And I don't know if the next picture, so here's a picture here. So here's lamina 2 is this one. So substantia gelatinosa is primarily this lamina 2 and some of lamina 1. And so you're seeing on this side, here's substantia gelatinosa, is this area, almost like a nucleus in a sense, within that gray matter of the spinal cord that just happens to pretty much encompass the area of 1 and 2. And I don't know why they say some of it extends into area 5, but a little bit sometimes can extend into area 5. So that's what the substantia gelatinosa is. It's an area where the cell bodies for the second order neurons of the spinal thalamic tract are located. And that substantia gelatinosa encompasses several laminal layers. Okay, so it's kind of like the substantia gelatinosa is more like a nucleus, just like, remember that Clark's nucleus, which processed some proprioceptive information as it came in from the lumbar spine and thoracic lumbar spine. Okay. And so taking a look here at this top diagram, look at the red. The red is our spinal thalamic tract. It comes in, and it comes in more this lateral division, so more lateral of the dorsal root. This picture doesn't show that great, but it's a more lateral division, okay? Where the green here is more medial, that's your proprioceptive, so the medial division of the dorsal root. Comes in, makes that synapse. This is the substantia gelatinosa right in here. Then the axon from that second order neuron projects down here, and it crosses over in this little tiny sliver of white matter. That's the anterior white commissure. Remember, a commissural fiber is connecting from one side to the other, so this is like a little commissure between the left and right side of your spinal cord. Just like your corpus callosum is a commissural fiber between the left and right side of your brain. This is the anterior white commissure. So the axon crosses, goes over here, and then it ascends in this, anterior and lateral, it's kind of this anterior lateral location in the spinal cord, okay? So that's in the white matter. Those are axons. Now they're going to go up, okay, to wherever they're going to go. And this is the exact same way all 4 of those pathways I just mentioned all come in the same way, make the similar connection, all start out in this anterolateral system. So all 4 of those pathways start out going up the spinal cord in that location. And do the same thing as far as making that first synapse in the substantia gelatinosa, crossing in the anterior white commissure. So it's nice. You can just, all you have to do is know that for the first order neuron, that's where they all go. That's where everything starts out. So then the second order neurons we just mentioned are in lamina 1, 2, and 5, which is the substantia gelatinosa. It desiccates, or it means crosses, in the anterior white commissure, which I just showed you. That's that area right there. Ascends and enters into the spinal thalamic tract. So this is just spinal thalamic right now. So it enters into the spinal thalamic tract, which is that anterolateral system right here. Stays in that same location all the way up the spinal cord. But once it hits the brainstem, it's moving a little more posterior here in the brainstem. It's a little more anterior and lateral, but now you start to see it move a little more posterior and lateral. Okay? At that point, it's called the spinal lemniscus. Just like, remember, the proprioceptive information, it started out as dorsal columns, and then it turned into a medial lemniscus. Well, this guy, instead of calling it a spinal thalamic tract, like in the spinal cord, once it crosses into the brainstem, now it changes names, and it's called the spinal lemniscus. And again, that lemniscus means kind of ribbon-like, although I will tell you this doesn't get flattened like the medial lemniscus does. It stays a little more rounded, so I don't know that's a great example of a lemniscus, but they just call it a lemniscus once it enters into the brainstem. Then the second synapse, okay? The second synapse is going to be between now our second and third order neurons, is in the same place as all the proprioceptive stuff. It's in the VPL. If it's coming from the body, the arm or the leg from the body, it's going to make a synapse in that ventroposterolateral part of the thalamus, and then it's just going to go to wherever that part of the homunculus is associated with the part of the body it's coming from, whether it's leg or arm. And it's going to go through the internal capsule right here, same as our conscious proprioceptive information. So there's a lot of areas of overlap here, okay? And it terminates in the postcentral gyrus, just like our conscious proprioceptive dorsal column medial lemniscal system. So it's that postcentral gyrus. Feel okay about that? So if we want to draw it here, so first order neuron, here's our, well, let's do a hand. What the heck? Hand. Pain receptor. It's going to be free nerve ending, right? Free nerve ending. It's going to come in here. This is spinothalamic, fast pain. What type of axon is this? A delta. Okay, it's an A delta fiber. Comes into this, yeah.
Are all the rest of the pathways C?
Yes.
Is the face
All.
both?
The face has A delta. There's a fast pain pathway for the face and a slow pain for the face. So yeah, all the fast pain is going to be A deltas. All the slow pains are going to be C fibers. Okay. So it's going to come into the spinal cord, and I'm just going to show you real quick, and I'll erase it. It may go up or down a couple levels before it actually makes its first connection. Okay, and it can go up or down in that little tiny tract called the dorsolateral tract of Lissauer. But for simplicity, we're just going to go ahead and ignore that fact for the moment. And just say it comes into the spinal cord, makes a connection. Let's change colors here to blue. Makes a connection right here. So what is this connection point? Where are we in right here? What's that structure called? This is the substantia gelatinosa. Okay. So now the cell body of the second order neurons in the substantia gelatinosa, it's going to cross immediately. It's going to cross at that level. And at that crossing point is the AWC, the anterior white commissure. Those are going to move into a lateral part of the spinal cord on the opposite side, and that is called the spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract going up the spinal cord. It's going to go up, and then it's going to cross into the medulla. And what's it called now? What's it changed names to? Spinal lemniscus. And it's going to stay the spinal lemniscus all the way up through the, now it's more towards the back and lateral part of the brainstem. Goes up to the brainstem, and then the third order neuron. The cell body for the third order neuron is going to be out here in the VPL. So it's going to come up, make a connection, and this is the arm and hand, so it's going to go probably about there. So this is VPL. This little area right here, that deep white matter, that's internal capsule. And this is postcentral gyrus. Okay, so there's what it looks like. Spinothalamic, fast pain. Now let's talk about the three slow aching pain pathways, or the divergent pathways. And you can see here, this is why they also sometimes call it the divergent pathways, because when it comes in, these axons will spread out their information to these multiple pathways. But they're all starting out with your spinothalamic, your fast pain, all in the same region. They all start at that lamina 1, 2, and 5, which is substantia gelatinosa. Okay, that's the cell bodies for the second order. The first order are out here in the dorsal root ganglion. So this is starting with, oh, here, I skipped the slide, sorry. Go back here. So starting with free nerve endings, they're all free nerve endings. Pain is all free nerve endings. The modalities that this spinal limbic system, one of these slow aching pain paths is going to be, this can be slow aching pain, difficult to localize. Okay, you just say, hey, my foot hurts, my leg hurts. The cell bodies are in the DRG right here, dorsal root ganglion, but the fiber here is now a C fiber. Okay, so C fiber versus A delta. It's unmyelinated and the diameter is smaller. So action potentials propagate much more slowly on it. Everything else so far is going to now be the same. It enters the lateral division of the dorsal root, just like the spinothalamic. It may go up and down a few levels in that little dorsal lateral tract of Lissauer. It's going to make its first synapse in the substantia gelatinosa, primarily lamina number 2. It's going to use the slow pain pathways, instead of like glutamate, they use substance P as their neurotransmitter. Okay, so neurotransmitter is substance P, which is somewhat unique to the slow pain pathways. That's this neurotransmitter that's used to signal the next cell. And then their second order neurons, the cell bodies, are in that substantia gelatinosa. That just like everything else, they're going to cross over in that anterior white commissure here. They're going to go up in the spinothalamic tract. So they're still in the spinothalamic tract, but they're not truly the spinothalamic tract. They're in that area, that anterolateral part of the spinal cord. Collectively, that's often called the spinothalamic tract, even though there's multiple, both slow and fast pain going up there. But then once they cross over to the low medulla into the brainstem, they're traveling with the spinothalamic, but they're all called the spinal lemniscus again at this point. So right now, everything's the same so far, which is nice. Here's something a little different, though. So for the spinal limbic, this is going to go to the limbic system. The limbic system is part of your cortex, okay? So it's going to have a third order neuron, but as opposed to synapsing in the VPL of the thalamus, there's another region called the intralaminar nucleus of the thalamus. And that's kind of what they're showing here. This is the intralaminar. There's like a lamina, there's like this separation between some different, you can see it better on here. That little nucleus right there is the intralaminar nucleus. There's this separation between the various parts, but within that separation, this little white kind of structure, there's a nucleus in there called the intralaminar nucleus. That intralaminar nucleus is then going to go to some of these deeper regions of the brain associated with limbic system function, okay? So it's going to go to like the cingulate gyrus, the fornix, what else? The nucleus accumbens. There's just some structures that are all considered, we haven't got there yet. When we get to the regional anatomy, we get to the cerebrum, we'll talk about the limbic system and the major, so this is going to distribute some of these signals to limbic system structures in your cerebrum. But they're going to stop at the thalamus because they're going up to your cerebral cortex and make a connection there, but in the interlaminar nucleus. They also go through the posterior limb of the internal capsule, kind of like the other ones, as they're in their way of adding their way to the limbic system structures. So terminates in multiple areas of the cortex, limbic areas, including areas related to emotion and personality, which is the limbic. Okay? All right. Next is spinal mesencephalic. Spinal mesencephalic stops in the brainstem, so it's only going to have 2 orders of neurons. Makes sense? So it's not going up to the cerebrum, so it's just going to have 2 orders. So everything's the same to start out with. Where it comes into the spinal cord, where it crosses, what the spinal thalamic tract, spinal lemniscus, but it's going to go up to the midbrain. And what they're showing here is they're showing that going. It's the red one going right here. That I've just turned yellow. So it's going to this area right here in the mesencephalon. And it does a couple of things. It carries pain information to both the superior colliculus. So remember these bumps back here? This is the superior colliculus. And remember there's a bump below that called the inferior colliculus. So this cross section is the level of the superior colliculus in the midbrain. So they don't show it here, but a little piece of this axon will branch off and go to the superior colliculus. But the other branch goes to this, there's a gray matter area right around the cerebral aqueduct. Remember the cerebral aqueduct connects your 3rd ventricle with your 4th ventricle? There's a little bit of gray matter around that cerebral aqueduct. And that gray matter is involved with descending tracts which modulate pain. So this periaqueductal gray, and we'll talk about it on Friday, cell bodies will send signals down your spinal cord, down to the area in your dorsal horn to dump some natural opiates in there to try to downregulate your pain. It's part of your natural internal pain control mechanisms. So this spinal mesencephalic tract, one of its purposes is to, after the slow pain started, is to then say, hey, let's control this a little bit. If this is going on too long, let's send some signals down from this periaqueductal gray. Let's send some axons from these cells down to squirt a little bit of natural opiates and calphins and endorphins in that area to counteract that substance P and to reduce pain and moderate it a little bit. Okay. The other thing it does is it delivers a little signal to the superior colliculus. And the superior colliculus has to do with reflexive movements of the eye that are not consciously mediated. And so what happens is that there's signals that are associated from that superior colliculus that will tell your eyes to direct their attention or move to a certain location without even you consciously being aware of it. So what will happen is when you get pain, that signal that goes to that superior colliculus will, in addition to you are consciously aware of the pain from the past fast pain signals, but you also get another signal that goes to that superior colliculus that makes your eyes automatically look to wherever the pain is coming from. Okay, so and those occur kind of at about a similar time because this is a shorter distance. It doesn't have to actually go up to your cortex and back and then tell your brain to actually have conscious awareness. This is at a subconscious level, but because of coming in on C fibers, they get to the same location about the same time. It's just another mechanism helping you direct your attention towards wherever the pain is, but this is more of a reflex, non-conscious way to look towards pain.
Would you categorize those as like 3rd order neurons, or is that where synapses and opsins move?
It's done. You mean the ones that go to the eye and tell your eye to move?
The eye or the descending tracts?
No, because the information's been delivered. So the descending or those would be like motor type pathways or not necessarily motor, but those would be descending pathways. This is all the afferent pathways. But that's a good question. So there's not a third order neuron here. This is just to deliver the information, not to then do anything with that information. So this is just 2 orders of neurons. Okay. So the spinal mesencephalic helps in descending pain control modulation via that periaqueductal gray, and then helps with your reflex eye movements to the location of your pain through the superior colliculus. Then we have the spino-reticular pathway. Spino-reticular starts out in the same location, crosses over, goes up in the spinothalamic and spinal lemniscus, okay, just like everything else. But now you'll notice these little branches coming off, and here's another branch coming off. There's a little dotted substance area in here. This whole area right here. Crud. Let me go back to a darker color here. So there's this little dotted area here. They're trying to show this area that runs all the way down through. It's kind of a column of cells that runs all the way down through your brainstem. That's the reticular formation. You're going to hear that reticular formation come up a lot. There's a lot of different things that happen in the reticular formation. There's things that happen with like consciousness, wakefulness, even basic control of your breathing and heart regulation. Pain control is going on there. Some of your cranial nerve nuclei are located there. But one of their big roles that they play is in descending pain control, in modulating, just like that periaqueductal gray around the cerebral aqueduct. This reticular formation is involved with descending pain control as well. Okay. So right now, all you want to know is that it ascends just like any part of the anterolateral system does. Synapses in the reticular formation of the brain. So it has little collaterals. They don't show one here. Mostly it's in the medulla, pons, and midbrain. So it makes connections throughout the brainstem reticular formation. All through the reticular formation, it's making connections. And then it tells it signals the reticular formation to send signals down your spinal cord to, again, help modulate pain. Sometimes, you'll see, I like the terms that we're using here. We're using spinal limbic, spinal reticular, and spinal mesencephalic because they tell you where they're going. Some terms you'll see is like paleo-spinal thalamic. And some people will call all the slow aching pain pathways, all 3 of those together, call them the paleo-spinal thalamic. Paleo, like really old, ancient. It's more primitive in nature, this primitive pain pathway. So if you're reading that terminology, in even previous editions of Ekman, this is a previous edition, called it the paleo-spinal thalamic tract. Some people use this term to encompass all 3 of those pathways. So there's some variation on what people call these slow pain pathways. For your exam, for your purposes, know the way I've called the 3 different. And that's how I think your book currently, the current edition, refers to them. Is that correct? Does that make sense? Good. All right, so you asked a question about now we have a fast pain equivalent for the head and face and a slow pain equivalent for the head and face. So the first is the fast pain, which is the trigeminothalamic. It's going to the cortex. It's going to be consciously aware of it. This is fast pain from the head and face. So here it is. It's a trigeminal nerve. Comes in. The first order neuron cell body is the trigeminal ganglion. The type of fiber this is an A delta. I don't have it on here, but it's an A delta fiber. Fast pain for the head and face. So it comes in at the level, this is the pons. That's where your trigeminal nerve is coming in, at the level of the pons. What's interesting is then it actually descends. It comes in and it descends first. It goes down your brainstem. And this little region that it's descending down your brainstem is called the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. So it's a mouthful. That's what it is. It's the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve. Because believe it or not, this little tract, it's called the spinal tract because it actually, they don't show it here, it actually goes down into your first few cervical vertebrae. C1, 2, and 3 actually has this little tract of your trigeminal nerve, goes all the way down into your spinal cord a little bit and can make connections with then the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. And so there's a little tract of white matter, but then right next to it is a area of gray matter that extends up and down in the brainstem, and it makes connections with this gray matter, which is this long nucleus that extends all the way down into the first few cervical segments called the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Okay? That's where the cell bodies for the second order neurons are. Once that connection is made, then they cross over. They cross over wherever that connection was made all along that spinal nucleus. They cross over at that level and cross over to the other side of the brainstem. And they ascend in what's called the trigeminal lemniscus. Just like we had a spinal lemniscus, we had a medial lemniscus, now we have a trigeminal lemniscus. So it makes sense that the ones that start to ascend, this fast pain, it's in the brainstem, so it's called the trigeminal lemniscus. So then it goes up the other side of the brainstem as the trigeminal lemniscus. This is fast pain. It's going to the thalamus, trigeminal thalamic. It's going to go and synapse the second order with the third order neuron in the VPM, the ventral posterolateral medial nucleus of the thalamus. The VPL is all body. This is head and face. And then it's going to go and deliver its message to the appropriate location on the postcentral gyrus for the face, for pain from the face. So it's a contralateral pathway, crosses, but it goes into the brainstem, goes down a little bit, starts making its connections, crosses over, then goes up the other side of the brainstem. So, yeah.
For example, are we gonna need to know like the fiber that comes from the face of the body or like that? Like if it's an A delta?
Yes. Yeah. So you'd want to know A delta or C fiber. That's really only two for pain. Then the other ones, remember a lot of them are A betas, and then you have the few 1As and 2s and so forth associated with the muscle spindle, the 1Bs with the Golgi tendon. So it's kind of somewhat easy to group some of those to remember those. Yeah.
Is there a slow pain that you can get from your face?
What's that?
Is there a slow pain?
Yes, we're going to do that next. Yep, so we're going to go through slow pain. This also goes through the internal capsule up here, the white matter up in the cerebrum as on its way to the postcentral gyrus. So that's the trigeminal thalamic. And I was going to show you, I'm trying to think where that was. It was, here you go. This is the trigeminal nerve. This is the fast pain pathways coming in here, and then it descends down in the brainstem and makes connections all the way along, goes all the way down into the upper cervical cord, and then this big long blue nucleus right here, that's the spinal nucleus of cranial nerve number 5. That's where the second cell bodies for the second order neurons are, in that long nucleus. And you have one on each side. There's a left and a right, okay? Makes the connection, and then it crosses over at that level and then goes up the other side of the brainstem, okay? So it's this long, narrow nucleus. And it's a big nucleus because you have lots of pain receptors in your head and face. So for migraines, one of the things they implicate with migraines is a dysfunction in this trigeminal nerve complex. As you have some malfunction of the nervous system relates to the trigeminal nerve or the spinal nucleus, the trigeminal nerve, and the ability to control pain with that. And they say that trigeminal neuralgia, which is this inflammation of the trigeminal nerve and pain, is probably the worst pain that you can almost have. And and some people's migraines are also involved the trigeminal nerve distribution. And also what's interesting is trigeminal neuralgia, where you get this just massive pain in your face from an inflamed trigeminal nerve. It's very recalcitrant or does not respond well to pain meds or opioids or anything like that. It's just something that people have to literally suffer through. People literally want to kill me. It hurts so bad, kill me, because even like opioids don't touch it. It can be that bad. It's very like electric shock, like somebody taking an ice pick and just stabbing it and moving it around in your face constantly for days on end, and then nothing touches it. So it's really a tough situation. I've only seen like one case like that was that bad. And you just couldn't do anything. All they could do was sit and suffer. And you couldn't really, there was not much you could do to help them with that until it went away. You hope it went away. Eventually, usually it does. Sometimes they use actually anti-seizure medicines for that versus pain meds, because it's a dysfunction in some, communication going on there, and anti-seizure medications tend to downregulate and impair the connection there a little bit. So I don't want to do that. Crap, I didn't want to keep all those. All right. Well, that sucks. That's all right. All right. Slow pain. I made it so you don't even have to know any certain pathways for this. Just know there is a slow pain equivalent for this. And this is the name of it. And it makes sort of sense. Trigemino reticulolimbic tract. So C fibers come in the trigeminal nerve. They go into your brainstem. Some of them go down in your brainstem and just make connections with the reticular formation. And that reticular formation then is used for pain control to help modulate your own pain control centers. Some of it goes up to the thalamus, to the interlaminar nucleus, but you don't have to know that here. And then it goes to the limbic system as well. Okay, so there's some similar connections to the spinal limbic tract. So it goes to both the brainstem, the reticular formation, and up to the limbic system. This is like the divergent pathways we have for our body.
So is that the same as the trigeminal reticular?
What's it called on there?
The ending instead of limbic.
Yes, it could be trigemino-reticulothalamic, because it does go to the thalamus, then it goes to the limbic system. So some books will refer to it as this, some will refer to it as as long as you see that reticulo in there, that just gives you a clue that it's slow pain. So. All right. I think we can get you guys hanging in there. If we get through a few more minutes here, I think we might. We're about done, aren't we? I think we just got a few more slides, and then we can. Yeah. Paul.
So if it terminates in the reticular formation, is that only a first order neuron since it never synapses, and then if it goes to the limbic system, synapses?
Yes. Just by the first order neuron, those go. So the reticular part of that is just, so it comes in and then those axons diverge. Some will just end right in the reticular formation with just one order of neuron. Some will go up to the thalamus, make a synapse, and then go to that, so it'd be a second order. But don't worry about, some of those actually do communicate with that spinal nucleus first, so there may be a second and a third order, but don't worry about with that. Just understand there is a slow pain pathway associated with the head and face, and it has connections with limbic system structures and reticular formation without worrying about orders of neurons or anything like that for that particular one. But good question. So we've mentioned this. We do have this thing called the homunculus, which is this, somatotopic orientation of a body on the postcentral gyrus. So this is where you have that discrete conscious awareness of proprioception, pain and temperature that you can point to and know exactly where on your body. And that's because it's going to these distinct regions associated with those on the cortex. Okay, so you see just how much proportion of the head and lips and face are represented here, how big the hand is, and then relatively how small, like just kind of the back of your head, not the front part of your head, but just like your scalp and the back of your head. You don't need a lot of detail, sensation, your forearm, your torso, your leg, but your foot's pretty big over here, and this is genitals is actually on this medial surface. So when we talk about people that have certain strokes, people that have a middle cerebral artery stroke, the middle cerebral artery supplies this region of your brain, and that's the most common stroke. So it's going to affect, well, I should say it affects this region here. It's going to affect more face and arm and hand than it is leg. So that's nice for us as PTs because when we talk about the motor system, it's a similar arrangement. Somebody has a stroke in the middle cerebral artery, which is the most common. Their arm and their face are weakest, and their leg is still usually fairly functional, so we can still get them up, move, walk, you know, those kind of things. Even though it might have some weakness, it's less. If they have an anterior cerebral artery stroke, the anterior cerebral artery supplies this region here. They're actually going to have more lower body dysfunction, and they'll also often have incontinence because of the genitals being there. They won't be able to even feel the perception of their bladder and those kind of things. So this is if your body was actually proportional to the surface area represented on the postcentral gyrus as relative importance or amount of sensory information, this is what your body would appear to look like. So it's a good quick representation of what our bodies prioritize as far as sensation and our sensory experience, okay, of how we deal with the real world. The only thing I wanted to show you here is some of that somatotopic organization that occurs in the cortex. Some of that is maintained throughout these pathways. Okay, we've already mentioned this is the dorsal columns back here. Okay, dorsal columns are back here. The most lateral is going to be cervical because that's added on last. This is a cross section through a cervical spinal cord level. This might be C6, C5. Then thoracic level information, lumbar, and then sacral. It's kind of layered in from lateral to medial, going from cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral. These are the proprioception fibers, axons, first order coming in, going up the dorsal columns. That's how they're kind of layered in there. This is the anterolateral system. So that anterolateral, your spinal thalamic tract, it's layered in from cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral from posterior to anterior. So this is posterior to anterior. So cervical is more posterior, sacral is more anterior in that pathway. And when we get into, and then this is actually your motor tracts. This is the cortical spinal tract, so that's for next week, is the motor system. It's also got some somatotopic arrangement, and it's more oriented medial to lateral, and this is medial and this is lateral, so it goes cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral from medial to lateral. This gets more important when we talk about certain types of spinal cord injuries. Like there's a certain type of spinal cord injury called a central cord lesion, where more the central part of your spinal cord is damaged. And so if you see this central cord lesion, it will often tend to, at least from a motor standpoint, affect more of your cervical, if it's a cervical spine lesion, it'll affect more of your upper body, both sensory and motor, because you're damaging more of this posterior part of the spinal thalamic tract and this medial part of the lateral cortical spinal tract. Don't need to know that now. Just starting to get you thinking when we start getting to lesions and localization of lesions and why this stuff is important to have some understanding of that, so you can start to predict the deficits you're going to see if you see a certain lesion or read it on an MRI report or something like that, what you're going to end up seeing as far as deficits go. So that's some good stuff. You guys, yeah. What's that?
Was it a spinal thalamic at the bottom
This is spinal thalamic tract here, and then this is lateral corticospinal, which you haven't learned yet. That's motor. But this bigger one here, this is dorsal columns. That's both. So this is actually, if you divide this up, this would be your fasciculus gracilis would be your lumbar and sacral proprioceptive information come from your lower body, and then your fasciculus cuneatus right here would be your cervical and thoracic information. But that's how it's kind of layered in there. And that whole thing is a dorsal column. And then if you include the whole other dorsal column on this side, this whole structure that's called the dorsal funiculus. You actually have, if you put these two together, this front region, this is the anterior funiculus, and then this whole region out here, this whole white matter region out here, that's the lateral funiculus. Those are the distinct larger regions of kind of the white matter around the spinal cord, and then you have your different pathways running within those larger regions, and they're called their own names. Does that make sense? So, just helps if you know some of that when you're reading, because they'll say the blank is located in the lateral funiculus, and you're like, oh my God, what's the lateral? Oh yeah, it's lateral funiculus. It's just that big lateral part of the spinal cord, and that's where the lateral corticospinal tract runs. That's where the spinal thalamic tract runs. It's just all in the lateral funiculus. Or the dorsal columns, they're just all running in the posterior funiculus. Or the anterior white commissure is located in the anterior funiculus. There's also some other pathways that you're going to learn about, some motor pathways that run here in the anterior funiculus, several of them. So, okay. Guess survive the pathways, at least this is the sensory pathways.